If you're new here, I like to make knives. It's not what the whole channel is about, but it's something I've done. I've seen people discussing and asking what it takes to make knives. So today, we're gonna walk you through 3 levels of a knife making tool bench from the very, very beginning up to some pretty advanced stuff. This is my current workshop. It's about 400 square feet and it is mostly geared toward knife making. Not everyone has space for a 400 square foot workshop in their basement. I totally get that. So taking it back to the very smallest I could come up with, the least amount of tools,
the smallest footprint.
If you are just dying to get into this particular hobby, here is what I would say is the minimum you would need. And to start off, I will point out that the fastest, easiest, cheapest way to get into knife making is to do what's called stock removal. This is a bar of stock. By removing some metal from it, it can become knife shaped. So before we get into what tools you need, I think I need to define what qualifies as being a knife. Technically, knives can be made of a lot of things. This one is made of bronze. This one here, plastic of course, but neither of those count for what we're doing today. We're looking at 3 qualifications. 1, the knife is made of hardenable steel, which has been properly hardened. 2, the knife is shaped to have a blade which is sharpened and holds an edge. 3, the knife has some form of handle. For example, here we have a knife made from hardened steel, shaped to have an edge, and it holds a blade, and it's got a handle to let you use it. So what do we need? What's the minimum we need to achieve those 3 goals? Well, I've got a piece of hardenable steel. This is 1084 carbon steel. I'm going to need to shape it, and for that I have a hacksaw and some files. This is a slow, arduous way to shape steel, but it does work and it doesn't cost very much. That will give me the blade shape and a handle of some sort. Then to heat treat it to make sure it holds an edge, I have a blowtorch and canola oil. This is not the best way to heat treat a knife. It will work with some types of steel. Alternatively, you could use W1 or W2, a water hardening steel, and instead of oil, use water. For final finishing and for sharpening the blade, we've got sandpaper, a few different grits of it. I'm not going for something fancy, I'm going for technically I made a knife. The fastest, simplest thing I can do. That's not a fancy knife shape, but it is a knife shape, technically. Oh, my triceps. There's more. To get through more of it. 1 piece down. Technically it works, eventually. Practically a knife already. We have a knife shape. It's not great, it's not refined, but we have like a profile, but it doesn't have any bevels on it. We need the grinds that turn it into a knife instead of just a knife-shaped piece of steel. And once again, we're using files. Grinding knife bevels with a file sucks. It takes forever. Frankly, I have yet to find a way that wasn't at least slightly physically painful. Now, just holding or bracing the knife and using the file is not the best way to do this. It's pretty uncomfortable, and it's not too complicated to make a jig that will hold a file at a precise angle while you're using it. That lets you put in much nicer, cleaner, crisper bevels than I may have on this knife here. I've actually made a knife like that before. This knife right here, this is like the first knife I ever made that actually followed the definition we're going with of a knife. This is copying a design by a guy called Sage Blades. Great work. It has all this decorative element that I put in using a rotary tool that I had available at work at the time, but the general shape of the knife was done with extremely limited tools, and all of the bevels that are in it, I did with a file. It did considerable shaping of the whole profile of the knife just with file. files. It's not easy and it's not fast, but it is possible. The knife is ready for heat treat. We don't have a heat source that can really heat the whole thing at once, so we're just gonna be doing what's called an edge quench. We're just gonna try and make it so that the edge of the knife gets hot enough that when it goes into the oil, it will be heat treated. I've got right here some magnets for testing. If the knife gets hot enough, it will no longer be attracted to the magnets. That's our goal, to get it so it won't stick to the magnets, at which point it will go into the oil. You know, my oil is kind of cold and it will actually pull heat out of the knife a little bit better if it's thinned by warming it up. So this is a scrap piece of steel. I'm just gonna warm this up, put it into the oil. That will warm up the oil, and then we'll do the knife. Scale jumping off all over the place. Three, two, one. Cool, there it is. It has been heat treated. It has not been heat treated very well. The whole edge is not nice and evenly hard, but it did heat treat enough that it is hardened steel. If we put an edge on it, it should hold it somewhat, a little, not a ton, but some. However, before we do that, there is an important step called tempering. So plunging it in the oil after heating it up makes it really hard, but it's also brittle, not what we want for a knife. So we're just gonna put this in the oven, regular kitchen oven, at 350 degrees for 2 hours. Then we're gonna do it again. With the knife tempered, it's time for the final step, which is just gonna be adding a handle. We're not going for anything crazy here. In fact, we're gonna use the simplest kind of handle I know for a knife, which is a paracord wrap. The paracord is just wrapped around and secured with a knot. It's not the best handle, but it does make it a little bit more comfortable than just the bare metal. And of course, once it has a handle, we need to actually sharpen it. I'm just using sandpaper with a block of wood to back it, and I'm just gonna keep grinding until I've got a nice edge, or nice enough. So how is our little knife? Well, let's do a couple quick tests. Let's see, we got our paracord. Yeah, that cut pretty nice. Let's see if we can just slice through it. Okay, here we go. Just cuts right through. Okay, how about this wood block? I know a piece of 2x4 isn't the end-all be-all test, but seems to be doing a pretty good job. Knife 1 on the super basic workbench is complete, so what do we have to do to level up? It does get a lot nicer if you actually have a workbench. Now you can go as crazy as you want with a workbench. This one is just fine. It's about 5 feet wide and about 20 inches deep. That should be plenty. I think we can get everything we need, even for the advanced tier workbench, fitting on something this size. Ugh. This particular one is from Harbor Freight. I think it cost $170, and this is already fancier than you need to get. If you want to just find a used table for sale on Craigslist or something like that, you could make that work. Here it is, our workbench is all assembled, and it's not huge, like I said, but I do think we can get everything we need on this workbench for some great knife making. Something that's extremely useful to have so you don't have to go at your metal with a hacksaw is a metal bandsaw. This one was sent to me by Vivor, and as it is, it's set up as sort of like a chopping hacksaw, and that's great for a lot of things. You got a clamp right here, you put your piece of metal or wood in there, clamp it in, and you can just drop this down while cutting. It's pretty cool. Now, even though that is a pretty cool use for it, for knife making, it would be better if we had access to it vertically so we can take our piece of metal and feed it in however we want. So let's build a stand that holds our bandsaw standing like this. Yes, I know I'm using tools to make tools and that we're building a workbench, but I'm using tools that aren't part of that workbench. I'm not saying that the workbench is going to be the only tools you have available or you have in your house, just that we're consolidating everything geared toward knife making into that one workbench. So you might have to use some other stuff to get it ready. Vivor sent us this mini furnace to test, and I am looking forward to doing that, but it has exposed ceramic blanket, and I really don't want to be testing it with that. It can kick the fibers up into the air, especially since I'm planning to use this in like an indoor area. So I am first going to take some high temperature cement. It's called refractory, and I'm gonna coat this whole thing. Everywhere that has the exposed ceramic blanket is gonna get covered. All right, got that all coated in my high temperature cement, looking pretty good. It's kind of dry right now, but I want it to get really dry, so I'm gonna try firing this up for the first time and keeping it like at a really low pressure and volume. I just barely want there to be any fire. Definitely not full forging temperature or anything. Ah, I see, I had it fully open. Oh, too little. There we go, a nice gentle flame. Really not extending out of the furnace much down here. Up here where the heat rises, I'd say it's much hotter, of course. Like I said, we're going for about as gentle of a heat as we can just to dry it out. All right, ran the fire a little bit. It seems to have dried out nicely. The cement in there actually got to like a glowing orange stage, and it seems to be holding up just fine, which means it's time for the next step, trying to heat up steel in there. And if we're gonna heat up some steel, we might as well try and shape it a little bit. Now, a couple caveats about this stage right here. I am not a blacksmith. I haven't tried this before other than like a couple little experiments. So you'll have to excuse me if I'm terrible at it. And this is a light duty anvil. This is also not the ideal way to set up a small anvil on top of a workbench. I know, but because it's light duty and I'm only gonna be doing a little bit of forging on it, I'm gonna try it and see how well it works to use this. So I am gonna bolt it down in one spot. We're gonna see if we can get a little bit of shaping on some steel done. I have no idea how long this takes. I am doing this in a garage. It's an enclosed room. So I actually have a carbon dioxide monitor, which was registering at 1,000 ppm, which isn't great. I opened the doors just a little bit to allow some airflow, and it is coming down. So it's still dropping because we've got a little bit more airflow. We might want to open them a little wider. Good thing to be aware of. Hey, I think we're starting to get some glow on there, so that's good. All right, now it's straight. Step one achieved. Well, I'm gonna call this attempt number 1 at forging a leaf, and I give myself a 1 out of 10 on the execution, because it is not good. And I don't remember how you're supposed to do it. But I got something in the direction of leaf shaped. I'm counting it. That piece of metal that I was just attempting to forge is now sitting in this. This is something called vermiculite. It's a very good insulator. Going from red hot to being in here should really help it cool down very, very slowly, which should help keep it soft if I want to start doing more work on it. That piece of metal was a little much for my skill level. If you want to see me try a little bit more forging on a slightly more beginner-friendly piece of metal, stick around to the end of the video. Other tools that I would consider invaluable if you're trying to step up your knife making game. 1, an electric drill. Putting holes into the tang of the knife so you can add a nice handle is way better than just having bare metal or even a paracord wrapped handle. You can also do some things like maybe put a fixture in here with some sandpaper wrapped around. It's a little bit of a power sander for really small profiles, but that brings us to the other upgrade, which is a belt sander. Now this right here is about the smallest, cheapest belt sander you can get. This is from Harbor Freight. It is a 1-inch wide by 30-inch belt sander. It's not fancy, like the opposite of fancy, but it is functional. You can use this to grind, but as fancy as it is not, it is so much better than doing all of your shaping with files. we now heat treat with the furnace instead of the blowtorch. I've also upgraded the quenching oil. So instead of canola oil, which barely works for a couple kinds of steels, this here is an actual quenching oil. It's made for this. This particular brand is Parks 50 quenching oil, and it works great. Excellent. Warp. Yeah, that bananaed pretty good. All right, this came out pretty nice looking, and just like the last knife, it has to go into the oven at 350 for 2 hours, 2 different times. Heat treated and tempered, let's finish this knife up. All right, epoxy's all cured, time to shape this handle down a bit. The micarta material that I use for a handle here is going to look a lot better if I just add a quick layer of wax on it, and then again it's time to sharpen. Here I'm using a few different sharpening tools. The main metal block looking piece is a diamond sharpening stone from Sharpall. I'll link that down in the description. Got most of it. Alright, so that's a nice sharp knife. And so we move to the third level bench, the high tier, the fancy stuff, you know, as a small compact make everything work on a tiny workbench goes. Let's look at what we've got. First up, we have our electric kiln. Now, if you are using a workbench this size, I do not recommend getting a kiln this big. This is one that's designed for knives up to 18 inches deep. That's way bigger than you need for getting started. I do believe you can get these in like a 12-inch variety. That would absolutely be the thing you would want in this case. However, I am a big fan of these kilns. This one is an even heat brand. There's a few brands out there. This one has done a great job for me for several years, so really enjoy this. You get way more accurate heating. It goes up to about 2000, maybe 2100 degrees, so you can do carbon steels and stainless steels with really precise temperature control. Next up, instead of using a drill by hand, we've got our drill press. Vivor sent me this one. This is a small 8-inch benchtop drill press, and honestly, it should work fantastic for knife making. You don't need the most powerful, you don't need a floor mounted, because the thickest thing you're ever drilling through is handle material. It's like that big. So for the most part, something this size is gonna do fantastic. Still got the bandsaw. This is absolutely a great tool to keep including. The biggest change, however, is the grinder. This is a belt grinder. This is a serious belt grinder. It's got 2 horsepower in the motor instead of whatever that one from Harbor Freight had. This particular one is an Ameribraid brand. They sent this to me to try out and I absolutely love it. I think this thing just totally kicks butt. It's got tons of optional accessories for doing all sorts of detail work. This version has a VFD attached to it that lets me use the regular house power and run my powerful motor with speed control, reversing direction, which you don't actually need to do on this particular machine. But this is so much of a step up. Like, if nothing else changes, this absolutely is what you want. I gotta say, I love it. Couple other little things. I've got here just a bench vise. This one's not even mounted to the bench right now, but you absolutely could just mount it right into this top here. The drill and the saw are not currently secured. They're just sitting there. So if you aren't using them, you can take them off, put them on the floor, put them sideways on your shelves down there, or wherever you want to keep them. Then if you are using them, you want a little more stability, clamp them down, make them usable, and that way you can get the most use out of your limited workspace. Down here, I've still got the gas forge and the anvil, so if you've got a project that needs some forging and anviling, you can still do that. And then we've also got our tools that go along with our belt grinder. I'm just storing them down here, but I can attach them to the machine in just a couple seconds and start grinding. Heat treatment is complete. Time for some cleanup. And then of course, putting a handle on it. Right now it's looking good. We got like that nice bronzy color because of the temperature we took it to for the temper. And now we go back to our belt grinder to make it look metallic and shiny again. Okay, I am liking the point we have the blade at this point, so we need a handle. And I've got this beautiful block of blue dyed stabilized burl wood. I think that is gonna look super nice on here. Get cutting. First, I'm just gonna slice this in half, that direction. I'm gonna try using this bandsaw for it. I don't know how that's gonna go. The epoxy is cured, the handle is secured, and it's time to shape it again back on the belt grinder. Took the handle up to about 1500 grit. So now we can take our wrappings off the blade. I'll add some wax to the handle, sharpen this thing, and it is good to go. Not bad. There you go, 3 levels of knife making workbench that really don't take up too much space. So if you think this is a cool hobby, try it. If you're looking to get any of the tools seen in this video, I've got some affiliate links down below for a bunch of them. If you're trying to get into this hobby, that'd be a great way to start. A huge thank you shout out to all of our supporters on Patreon. We could not do these videos without you. If you're interested in joining the Patreon supporters, the link for that is in the description. Now let's try a little bit more forging. All right, this piece of metal should put up a little less resistance to being forged. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do anything, but I wanna try again. Ooh, that forearm. See if I can't use the edge of this anvil to cut off part of the steel. There we go. That's pretty straight. Well, that is the point I got it to. Forging. I think that's all right for a first try.